are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're going to be cracking the case of the surprisingly entertaining film with Enola Holmes 2 on this latest Random Acts of Opinion coming up right now. It turns out, some risks are just worth taking, opinion nerds. It's not always easy to be asked to take a chance. No matter how small or seemingly inconsequential, every time you pull the lever on life's great slot machine, you're taking a risk. Sometimes you're betting life and limb or risking exposing your heart to swift, piercing agony, and sometimes you just risk pissing away 2 hours of your life you know you can't get back on a movie that's at best forgettable and at worst infuriating. Obviously not all risk is equal, but risk exists just the same. Similarly, while you may come out on top of a risky scenario, you have to gauge whether your gains were worth the effort. There's generally more risk in making art than engaging with it unless that art is a knife-throwing exhibition with audience participation. Still, when you give of your time and attention, you hope to get something back, and just breaking even can be almost as frustrating as losing. You can try to mitigate the risk by doing research and analysis, but the only choice you can make is whether or not to play. Hot off of her first case, Enola Holmes sets out to make a name for herself as a detective equal to her older brother Sherlock. But after it seems no one will give her a chance, a missing persons case appears, leading her into a conspiracy she'll have to team up with her famous brother to unravel. Based on the book series by Nancy Springer, Enola Holmes 2 is directed by Harry Bradbeer from a screenplay by Jack Thorne. The film stars Millie Bobby Brown, Henry Cavill, Louis Partridge, Adil Akhtar, Hannah Dodd, Susan Wokoma, David Thewlis, and Helena Bonham Carter. Now, keep a keen eye out, opinion nerds. There are spoilers afoot. Now, there is no way to ignore the giant elephant who arrived at tea. The Enola Holmes series is a derivative work. Nancy Springer, who developed the character and has written the book since 2007, developed a plausible way to insert a new character into a pre-existing literary world for the purpose of capitalizing on the existing character's recognizable history. Deducing that the Sherlock Holmes character, as it's been understood since his first appearance in 1887, would be unlikely to have a daughter, Springer conceived of a sister many years his junior, conceived by accident, and whose exploits occur some years before the most well-known of Holmes' mysteries, cleverly avoiding direct interference with the existing continuity so the two series can exist side by side. A bit of a self-insert for the author, Springer believed she could create a character that could match Holmes for brains and toughness while retaining its femininity, not something all works of this kind seem as interested in doing. We live in a world where reboots and reimaginings have made multiversal theory a common topic, so stretched as it may appear on the surface, the idea that Sherlock Holmes could have a younger sister who's also a detective in London in the late 1800s isn't as far out as it may have seemed some years past. The world accepted that famous orphan James Bond had a nephew for the purpose of a children's animated show, and the chances we'd blow it over this are slim to none. The character was first adapted for the screen in 2020's aptly titled Enola Holmes, with actress Millie Bobby Brown cast as the younger Holmes and Henry Cavill, apparently set on collecting iconic pop culture roles as he's been Superman and has had his eye on James Bond for years, stepping in to play the better-known Sherlock. Also directed by Bradbeer, the film was greeted with mild reviews that praised both Brown and Cavill for their portrayals, but were split on the anachronistic girl power approach to the character and her story. The positioning of the series as Holmes for young women apparently makes some Holmes fans feel like they're on the outside looking in, as there hasn't been what they consider a true portrayal of the classic character in some time. Director Guy Ritchie and Robert Downey Jr. created two period films in 2009 and 2011, while Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman starred in a modern television serial that ran sporadically between 2010 and 2017 for the BBC. So we live in a time where some people feel they are being actively pushed aside, at least in pop culture. You would think it would be impossible for anyone to make the case that this film intends to do anything like that, but unlike the Holmes' keen observational skills, some people only see the world for their fears. Enola Holmes 2 bases its plot loosely around the historical matchstick women, a group of matchstick makers and packers who gathered to protest poor working conditions in London's matchstick factory. The film builds a conspiracy around the plot of the workers involving a missing girl, an agreement between powerful men to cover up the use of more dangerous products in search of profit, and a mysterious mastermind leading Sherlock on a confusing chase. Whereas the story of the first film is about the younger Holmes being forced to discover her independence from her brothers Sherlock and Mycroft in a search for their missing mother, played by Bonham Carter, and a desire to prove she is her brother's detective equal, the new film will tell a story where Enola and Sherlock must learn that being independent does not mean being alone, and that asking for help does not diminish who you are. Thorne's screenplay capably balances plot and story, increasing the size of Sherlock's role from the first film while reducing the sense of antagonism between he and Enola to create a more balanced partnership that doesn't significantly diminish one for the other. But like the first film, the presentation can't quite manage the reality that the small teenage Enola would be less experienced and less physically capable than her brawny older brother, which stretches the portrayal a bit to allow the young woman to play in the same arena as the classic Holmes. Like most Holmes-style mysteries, the plot often proceeds based on knowledge the characters have that the audience does not and likely could not, which allows one to hold suspicions while never being able to get ahead of the plot unless they're very keen. It's easy to see this as engaging for both the young teen target audience and adults, though it's obviously emotionally weighted towards its younger viewers. The screenplay features a number of smart setups, payoffs, and quite a bit of witty dialogue, though a couple of the scenes do feel rather contrived or inorganic. While some of the characters like Thulis' Superintendent Grail and Oktar's Inspector Lestrade may be a bit cartoonish, they are nonetheless acceptable for the humorously toned film. Thorne and Bradbeer lay out how the film will operate right from the beginning, displaying the film's use of fourth wall breaks, flashbacks, cutaways, and humor right up front. It perfectly sets expectations for how the experience will play, and the material very much delivers on that promise. Bradbeer keeps things on the lighter side while not diminishing the sense of danger in late 19th century London. Enola's frequent addressing of the audience offers a less subtle but more easily understandable look into her perspectives, thoughts, and emotions, which, while reducing the amount of craft necessary to communicate such in the film, produces a much more immediate connection with the viewer. Cavill's Sherlock is considerably more open than the aforementioned example, still somewhat aloof, but nowhere near the semi-sociopathic Asperger syndrome approach taken with those other works. Brown and Cavill's interactions are understandably the heart of the film, with the two characters experiencing change together as opposed to one teaching something to the other in a condescending way. Most of the film's humor is derived from the young Enola's awkward social interactions, where her more modern perspective, at least by our standards, clashes with period norms, an aspect of the character meant to make her more easily relatable, but which often makes her seem alien to the world which she inhabits. The character is understandably more enthusiastic and emotional than Sherlock, and while there are times when Brown may be dialing it up a bit too much against Cavill's quiet stoicism, it does provide the appropriate emotional thrust one might attribute to a young woman of 16 or 17. The film does contain the seemingly accepted themes of establishing one's identity apart from your parents and exploring young love that much of this kind of material indulges in to provide the bulk of its emotional heft, but it avoids cliche and only just approaches layering upon the character the kind of effusive, "you're perfect just the way you are" praise that often accompanies work aimed at young women, something a middle-aged film critic doesn't easily relate to. Bradbeer and cinematographer Giles Nuchin framed their digital image at 239 to take in the densely detailed world around the characters, and the world of Enola Holmes is certainly more believable than a bog-standard television series, the camera being much more engaged with telling the story than simply observing it, and that goes a long way towards separating a cinematic experience from a television show, though the camera still observes more than it provokes. Though not an intense visual experience, the image is well balanced and believable, grounding the storytelling and allowing it to shoulder the dramatic weight of some of the film's events. There isn't much in the way of filmmaking that stands out as notable, and while the image has scope, it lacks depth and density, which makes it feel a little smaller and closer than maybe it should. It's a case for contemplating aspect ratio, as a 185 framing may have produced a different experience while still keeping the audience close and maintaining the impression of reality. This is, of course, all academic, but it's still interesting to consider. Choosing to watch this film felt like more of a gamble than it probably should have. I remember seeing the first film and not being particularly thrilled by it, but at this point I can't really remember why. The only thing I can recall is a feeling of, oh no, here we go again, and how it approached its girl power messaging and the idea that it was men in specific holding Enola back, most specifically embodied by her oldest brother, Mycroft. So one of the things I like about this film in that regard is that it places Enola as an independent and forward-thinking young woman against the constraints of the time, culture, and society she exists citizen rather than by men in specific. No, that honor belongs to the film's surprise villain, who, upon being captured, delivers a tortured and torturous monologue on the subject, as well as with the film's denouement. Both films have Enola trying to prove herself against Sherlock, but I think they do a very smart job of illustrating it's because of who he is and not what he is. It also helps that the film doesn't spend its time endlessly praising Enola and telling her how rad she is. This is a character with a lot of strengths, but also a lot of room to grow, which makes her more interesting and makes her stories more exciting. Unfortunately, there are a couple characters in the film that are significantly altered from their canonical presentations, and that may cause some waves among certain groups. One is fairly negligible, while the other is pretty severe and certainly not a change that can be reconciled with the Holmes canon in any way. The reveal of this change is also the pin that threatens to let all of the air out of the balloon at the last minute, not because of the nature of the change, but because of the scene that accompanies it. This is the kind of change that should spark healthy debates about the nature of adaptation and how much you can or can't change something and in what ways they can be changed. Unfortunately, these always just end up in arguments about respecting the lore, the fans, or whatever other bullshit. I don't care about the change. I care about the point they had to hammer in with it, and we'd been doing so well up to then. Honestly, I was surprised to find how much I enjoyed this film, and it caused me to think on the previous installment and re-examine my feelings about it. Cavill displays a wry sense of humor, and Brown's emotive abilities are easily able to draw a sympathetic reaction. I was very happy with how intelligently the film was written and how it maintained a balance of humor that didn't become ridiculous and drama that didn't become maudlin in an attempt to create the swinging pendulum of emotion that's come to typify YA storytelling, at least as far as this old man can tell. The only real problem I can see is that increasing the size of Sherlock's role in Enola's films threatened to overshadow her because, by design, his adventures are bound to be more thrilling and Cavill's presence is just so much larger, both physical and otherwise. It creates an unfortunate tug of war. You want the character to be there, but the more the character you get, the more the character you want. It's going to continue to be a tough tug in either direction. For now, this film seems to find a reasonable balance that gives you enough Sherlock to be happy while making sure Enola stays front and center in her own story. Especially given its home on Netflix, Enola Holmes 2 isn't much of a risk to check out. It doesn't seem like it was much of a risk to make either, but that's a different discussion. It would be easy for a film like this not to go over with a middle-aged guy like me, but Thorne, Bradbeer, Brown, and Cavill hold a line that keeps this YA piece from feeling too juvenile with an intriguing mystery, wit, and sincerity. Sometimes you roll the dice on a movie and come away with nothing more than 2 empty hours burning a hole in your soul. But sometimes you get lucky and the risk pays off. Enola Holmes 2 isn't going to be the kind of jackpot that breaks the house, but if you're willing to spin the wheel, I think there's a good chance you'll come out ahead. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.